We looked at the errors that were made, and I looked at it from perspective of we need to have an independent review. I mean, I know that Elections BC is doing the best they can, and I don't want to undermine the confidence of the people of British Columbia in our electoral system. But when you have an election that is this tight and you have boxes of ballots that were misplaced or that were not counted, it does bring into question sort of what has gone on and what else could potentially be there. And I think the only way to make sure that we can restore complete confidence in our electoral system is an independent review to look at everything from the legislation right through to how ballots are counted, through to how Elections BC have handled the whole election process.
Okay, so you're calling for an independent review. We heard today from Premier David Eby. He's calling for an all-party committee to examine what happened here and to recommend improvements. Where do you stand on that?
The challenge with having an all-party committee is, of course, then you end up with partisan politics being at play, with the government in control of an all-party committee, of course, with its majority. This is why you want to have an independent look at it, and with an independent look too, they can look at things. If you give them a full scope to be able to look at it, they can look at things, for example, of how telephone balloting is done and how they are able to make sure that they're Canadian citizens and that they're the individuals who say they are as part of voting process. They can go through all components just to be able to reinforce how elections are done, the legislation that we have in place, whether any changes are needed, and most importantly, to be able to restore that confidence that people should have in our electoral system.
Well, it was interesting. You did react quite quickly to the news yesterday. We're releasing a statement that made it clear that you're not disputing the final outcome of the election. I mean, why was it important to you to make it clear that the final result of the election is not in question here?
Democracy is a delicate structure, if you want to call it that. And if we do not have confidence in our democratic processes, we are in serious trouble. And I don't want to be doing anything that's going to undermine the process, which is why I say that we have accepted the results. But what we need to do is we need to make sure that the process is there going forward, that people can have confidence in it, and that they know, I guess you could say, how the sausage is made. People can have that independent look behind the scenes of the whole process through it, including legislation, and have confidence that in future elections that the right steps are being taken and that we don't have ballot boxes that go missing.
Well, I'd like you to hear a little bit more of what the Chief Electoral Officer, Anton Bogman, said earlier today.
There may have been other contributing factors, including the extreme weather conditions on Election Day. It was also the first provincial election that was administered following the significant changes to the electoral legislation that were made in 2019. And while this process was fully tested in simulations and in 4 provincial by-elections, there are aspects like the out-of-district voting and counting that could only be administered in a full provincial election.
Again, that was Chief Electoral Officer Anton Bogman. So, John Rustad, these problems were eventually caught and flagged. The public has been given an explanation. Just how much assurance do you take from Elections BC in their update today?
Well, I think when we went and did the final count more than a week ago, we were told by Elections BC that all the ballots were there and they're all being counted. And now we find that wasn't the case. This is why we need to have an independent look. Of course, Elections BC is going to come out and say that they did everything right and there was just a few errors. But the question is there anything more to be found? And we don't know. And Elections BC doesn't know. And I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt that everything has been done properly and that there is nothing else there. But we just need to make sure, for the people in British Columbia to have confidence in our electoral system, we need to make sure that what has gone on was isolated, fully explained, and if there are any errors in legislation, that we are able to look at it and make changes. For example, telephone voting. There's no way to know who actually was voted. Political parties have lists of data and information. There's no way to know for sure that it is a particular individual who has voted as part of that. And so is that something that we want to be able to have? Is that something that needs to be looked at? And only by looking at it from an independent perspective and being able to bring forward those kind of thoughts and ideas, you can make those kind of changes above the partisan politics that can go on in the legislature.
Okay, elections BC and these errors aside, I'm just curious, how are you doing this week? We're still waiting for the final outcome of the judicial recounts, and we know the final word. What's been going through your mind this week?
Well, we've resolved to the work that is in front of us as the Conservative Party of British Columbia and myself as leader to make sure that we are an effective opposition, make sure that we can put forward the things that need to be put forward in the legislature and hold government to account. So we're going through our organizational process, doing interviews with everybody, making sure that we can have our critics in place, putting that structure in place so that when the legislature is called back, which I suspect will be later this month, we'll be in full gear being able to hold the government to account and push forward the things that we think are important for the average everyday person in British Columbia.
Okay, are you expecting any surprises with the final counts?
It's unusual for that to happen. I think the chances of anything changing in a judicial count is very, very slim. I don't ever recall a situation where there has been a change from a judicial account. Having said that, it's going to be important that we do go through that process and that it's looked at properly.
Okay, we appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me on.